Fix Bayonets, comrades. This is Chief Guard of the Republic Radio Show with your co-hosts Mike Tooman and Paul Burvid every Saturday noon to 1. The Fox River Valley Media Network, WRMN, 1410 AM. Today, however, we have been superseded by the mighty White Sox. So this is only going out over the YouTube. So I will do my best when I get home to upload it to the cgr.silink.net page and the Chief Guard of the Republic YouTube channel, the YouTube channel. So you can text us in here at 505-926-1410. Can we still do the voice?
We sure can.
All right, you can voice call us in 847-931-1410, or you could just hit us up in the chat on the YouTube Live channel for WRMN1410.com. How you doing, Paul? Yep, can't hear Paul. I'll get him. All right, Matt's coming to work on that. I really got to sit down and learn all these, what do you call it? The producer programs that they use on the computer and the soundboards. Just out of curiosity. Maybe someday, I'll have to take over. I don't know if I'm that techie able yet. So we got Paul in?
Not quite. Let me see here.
Yeah. So last week, while we're waiting for Paul to get on here, is that I could see him right here, and you'll be able to see him too, and we're just waiting for the sound. But last week we were talking about boondoggles of the government, especially Department of Defense, and all this money that's being spent. And one of the things that that I said, hey, where is all this developmental products that came out of the money that was spent? Why didn't the government have license to that? I mean, they paid for the research. They should have the rights to the intellectual property on that. And I live in the real world. Some people live in the real world. I grew up in Chicago, and there are some people that do live in a bubble and they trust everything, but it's just like, hey, when it comes to big corporate, all right, it's the bottom line. And especially international corporations that cross borders, they have multiple production facilities outside of the United States, inside of the United States, all over. They got the bean counters juggling the numbers and saying, well, this is good for the corporation, and then they say it's good for their stockholders, but they're really saying it's good for their corporate officer bonuses. But yeah, by law, they have to look out for the best interest of the stockholder. But again, that's not very patriotic, because they're not looking out for the U.S. first. And that leads into what we've been hearing all week about the tariffs that President Trump is putting in. Hey, Paul, can you? Nope, no, all Paul. Right. All right, so those tariffs, people are screaming, oh my God, it's raising the price of my cardboard boxes, or it's raising the price of this or that, which we would normally import. From out of season is in season in South America. So we import a lot of fruits and vegetables and stuff because they're in season in South America. Some places closer to the equator can grow this food all year long, and we import that also. So there's when we export stuff that's in season for us and out of season for South America, there's tariffs on that. So our produce costs more down there. So people just don't eat out of season. That's old world stuff without the massive logistics. People weren't eating out of season. You learned to go buy the foods that were in season, or you would preserve them. Right? So we have reduced tariffs because of international corporations. If they could set up in a different country and import this and make the stuff cheaper and send it to the United States without being worried about tariffs, that was more money to the bottom line, and so more money to their bonuses. Right? So now, right, if you put a tariff on that, all of a sudden you have to you have to make the bean counter start counting again. And I'm sure the current administration has their bean counters and saying This is the minimum amount of tariffs that you will have to make it more expensive for the corporations to produce something in, let's say, Mexico, than to produce it in the United States. So they put that tariff on, and now the companies, the major international corporations, say, you know, it's really cheaper for us to produce it in the United States because it means more for our shareholders and our bonuses. So now that comes back, and it has a reciprocal effect. It also creates more jobs. So less people are out of work, there's less need for social welfare, right? There's more money flowing around. Like, a lot of people won't like Reaganomics, but it's like a rising tide floats all boats. So I've been to Haiti, and people think that people in the United States live in poverty. They haven't seen poverty. We live well. Back in the day, I had some Russian thespians come in. I was going to the University of Illinois at Chicago, my alma mater, YUCC for short, UICC. And I was studying Russian there to back up my studies at the Defense Language Institute. And they brought in a bunch of these thespians, and they were doing Macbeth, which in Russian, which was great, all right? It was great. And I'm driving them around, and I've got two cars. I've got my old 65, the 65 Barracuda, my Plymouth Barracuda, and I had my 1989 Yugo, or was it 87 Yugo, 1987 Yugo. And they're questioning me about stuff. I live in an apartment, right, with in 2-flat that I had, and so, you know, and I had my wife and my one child, and they're saying, well, what are your living conditions like? And I says, well, I'm pretty dirt poor. I mean, I live hand to mouth. I got this old Barracuda there that I have to use when my wife's using the Yugo. You know, it's a small little itty bitty car. And then I got an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, and it's me, the wife, and one kid. And they're like, what do you mean? You think that's poor? That's what some very rich people aspire to in Moscow. I'm like, okay, so Evan got that little thing out of the way. So the biggest thing to explain tariffs and to explain the economic war that is going on between us and China. And for the previous 4 years that Trump was president, 2024. So 2017 to 2021, because he's sworn in office 21. So 2017 to 2021, when President Trump was in office, he was carrying out an economic war against China, and he was creaming them. They were in tears. Their economy almost crashed, and the reason their economy almost crashed is because they're doing an economic war, but they're subsidizing it. So after World War II, the entire world was blown up. We bombed the snot out of everything. The Germans bombed the snot out of Great Britain. And the only country that really didn't get bombed, other than, I think the Japanese dropped a few bombs in Washington State. They had a float plane that dropped a couple. They bombed the territories of Alaska, the Aleutians. They also bombed Pearl Harbor and the Commonwealth of the Philippines and Guam, all right? But the actual states, the actual 48 states back then, except for Seattle, never got bombed. And Seattle was like 2 firebombs that didn't really work, all right? So we had destroyed all our enemies, their ability to produce. So, except the Russians, right? So after World War II, we are still dealing with 1880s steel technology because we didn't need anything else. It never got better. We're just pumping out the same steel, good quality American steel. But China, Japan, Korea, every other country built new steel mills, brand new steel mills. So they're more efficient, and they can make quicker, better, cheaper steel. And their people lived at a lower standard of living, especially in China. So you didn't have the big labor costs. But on top of that, China lowered the price of steel so low by subsidizing it. And at the same time, they put huge tariffs on any U.S. steel, higher quality steel. Everyone put U.S. tariffs on higher steel. So people were buying, even in the United States, the companies started going, well, it's cheaper to buy Chinese steel, even with, whatever, and we'll just use that. So the steel mills started going out of business. The processors of the steel started going out of business. All these high-paying jobs were lost, right? At the same time, you have to look that's a false thing on China. It's a war. I just lost though. Oh, there it is. Can we hear it, Paul?
Yeah, I'd have to see. There's really nothing on this side that's wrong. I would maybe have Paul. Can you hear me, Paul? Okay. I'm going to have you try to log out first and then log back in, and we'll see if maybe that'll reset the sound on your end.
Okay. So while Paul's there, the point I'm making here is that was the target of the subsidizing the Chinese steel. All right. They weren't doing it in a friendly manner to say, oh, we're going to be friendly to the world. Everyone uses steel. We're going to sell them cheaper steel and so show them how much better communist China is. No, they wanted us to shut down our steel mills, to let our steel mills get dilapidated, to let our skilled steel workers get, just age out, find other jobs or whatever. And then that is warfare. If we actually have to go to war and we have to resupply, build more ships, build tanks, build all the equipment of war, we're not going to get that cheap Chinese steel anymore. We're going to have to build our own steel, and we're going to have to ramp up these old, dilapidated steel mills. And we can't do that overnight. You can't just turn the switch on. It's going to take months, maybe even years. Plus, you have to train up the new steel workers, the skilled steel workers in there to get that job done. That's going to take months. A massive war isn't going to last that long. If you can wipe out the logistics, you got the edge. You got the edge. If we can't replace our stuff, we got to deal with what we have, and what we have is sorely needing right now. All right, because I believe that a lot of our Department of Defense funds have been spent on programs to make our people more enlightened rather than training to make them more lethal, rather than better weapons to make them more lethal, modernizing stuff to make them more lethal. So it's like, again, when I was at a Pentagon, they were talking about, these units, and I talk about this. I talk about this in one of my novels. So my novel's called Under Platoon. It's a military novel about the world's most average kid that joins the Army and goes to Afghanistan. So just the world's most average kid. I think it's pretty good because it has all the, what do you call it, iconoclast. Hi, Paul. Nope, no Paul.
I don't know.
You're not muted on your end, are you? Nope.
Not on our end.
Sometimes on the computers they shut off the microphones, but you haven't done anything with that since the last show, right?
Okay.
Hey, can he call in? Mm-hmm. Hey, Paul, why don't you call in at 847-931-1410 on your cell phone? Because we could see you and then we could hear you on the phone. Maybe you can't hear me now. Can you?
No, he can still hear you.
All right. Yeah. So while Paul gets his cell phone, I think Marla will bring it to him. Marla was on one of our earliest shows. She's very, very in touch. So I'm there, and they're talking about pre-positioning equipment, and we don't have, we got the logistics all pre-positioned, and that we have no problem logistically for like first 90 days of the war. And I go, well, that's pretty hubris. Here I am, the warrant officer, and I'm telling these generals, that's a lot of hubris there. What makes you think that the North Koreans aren't going to overrun all of our forces and get 25 miles into South Korea in the first day and destroy all your prepositioned, probably more than 25 miles, but prepositioned logistics, Why do you think you could prevent that? And you know what you have to replace it with? National Guard and Reserve equipment. And that stuff's 10 to 15 years old. Some of this stuff doesn't even talk to the active duty stuff. And you're like, what? So you're going to have to make sure this stuff is going to get over there and that they're going to need to use the older technology, and our older technology can stand up. In the meantime, you better wrap up production and be able to pump that stuff out daily. If you follow the war in the Ukraine, the greatly unfortunate war in the Ukrainian area, southeast Europe, you'll see that the main thing is who can replace their tanks and their armored personnel carriers faster. All right? Now, we're shipping a lot of them over there, and the Russians are producing them right there. And I think that's what the war is really going to depend on over there. So if you look at what's happening currently, you have to look what will happen in the near future. And if we don't start our steel mills and our production facilities up, who do you think makes tanks? Auto manufacturers, right? Or trucks, or any other thing, armored personnel carriers. Auto manufacturers have the tooling, the robots, everything to do that. That's why we produced, Ford produced tanks, Chevy produced tanks. All the automobile companies were producing massive amounts of tanks. All right? So we had that production. We're industrialized. There wasn't any of those problems. We had that production going. All right. Now that production has greatly sputtered out and has been what they call New World Order, globalist, spread out, because let's take the cheapest workers, the cheapest labor costs, the cheapest material costs. Let's count the beans, and if I make one penny more, I'm going to do it there. So how do we protect ourselves? We got to tell the corporations. These corporations are like small children. They're not patriotic. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart for the U.S. government, for the people of the USA, and for the people that allowed them to become such large corporations that they made so much money. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for a free market economy, but there's a point. If you're taking the man's dime, and the man's dime, all right, the king's coin, which is the U.S. government, not that we're a monarchy, but you're taking the king's coin by being in this country and having the protection of this country and being a citizen of this country, there should be a little bit of payback there. But a lot of them don't see it that way. So you have to be very blunt about it, and you have to say, listen, if you don't listen to me, I'll make sure you listen to me. I won't beat you, I won't hurt you, anything, but I will cost you money.
Hello?
Is that Paul online? There's still some technical difficulties here. So not only is raising the tariff allowing us, our corp, bringing jobs back, forcibly bringing jobs back in this free market economy, forcibly bringing them back, all right, and forcing these corporations to start ramping up their production facilities. And that makes sure that we are less of a soft target. Because if you think I'm just the genius that has figured this out, I'm just a little guy here, in Chicago, retired, 38 years in the Army. I was a warrant officer, military intelligence. But if I could figure it out, you think the guys, the guys that have been training and doing this for all the time, their whole lives in Russia, in China, in North Korea, in Iran, all right, the full timers haven't figured it out that if you can destroy our production capability economically by offering us cheap goods or doing cheap stuff, right? That you don't have to bomb us. We'll just let the stuff fall apart. It'll just run, gone, falling apart. It used to be a good steel mill. Now, How long is it going to take to get those fires lit again, to get everything in there, but the main thing, to get the workers trained. People say that, oh, that's an unskilled job. No, it's not. My grandfather worked for Central Steel and Wire over in Brighton Park, in Chicago there. And it is you can set yourself on fire and burn yourself to death quite easily in a steel mill, aside from getting squashed and everything else. You have to know how to use that machinery, the tools, how it's made, how it's poured, all that stuff. You can't train that in a day. You can't train that in a week. It takes years and years, like a fine skill to be a concert violinist. You know, that takes a lot of training, right? To be an expert steel worker, you know, you're going to be in the job. You just don't go to college and then come in and with no hands on and go to do it. So I think, and if you disagree with me, call in and tell me, you're just not too bright. You don't see it. It's not going to work. We're all going to starve to death. I don't think that's going to happen, because what my biggest thing is, though. Oh, here we go. I'm getting some.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got Paul. Welcome back, Paul. No, I lost Paul. Wait.
He dropped. Yeah.
What? You have him hooked back in?
He's not on the line.
Oh, he was through the line?
Yeah.
Yeah, you dropped off the line, Paul. I think they hung up on you. Not intentionally. Can you call back in on the phone? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hi, I tried 2 different phones, so I don't know. I think it must be the connection.
Yeah, I'm getting a little feedback, but Matt will straighten it out. I think Saturday afternoon is when they shake out all the bugs from the system.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly, Paul.
All right, I got the sound down on my Zoom feed. Yeah, okay, I'm back. I tried 2 different phones, so I don't think it's my end, but whatever.
All right, so yeah, I pretty much agree with you. Sometimes I pulled my hair out, working on something, especially in the Army when we had to connect in, through the internet on stuff and everything, and I'd be pulling my hair out trying to find out what I was doing wrong, only to find out it was all on their end.
Yeah.
And no one on their end was doing everything because they're blaming everyone else. But Matt has been working frantically.
No, that's okay. I'm here.
So what do you think about what I said so far?
I agree with you. I can't help but think, though, this is happening at a bad time for some people. I know the theory on it, and I know what they're supposed to be doing, and I understand. We've basically been supporting all these other countries with, we haven't taken what we call retaliatory trade matters since, like, World War II. But, I can't help but thinking we could have maybe tried to phase it in a little bit different way, or did them, started out at a lower level, and then while we're ramping up production. My worry is that we won't get our end of production up in time to forestall some kind of economic crisis around the world. So that's my concern.
Well, okay, yeah, if you want to crash the entire world economy right now, almost the entire world, especially China, is funded by U.S. debt. That funds the entire world. They all buy our bonds. We borrow money to spend above what we have, and then we pay interest on that, and the interest is paid to foreign countries, right? It's foreign debt. You want to wipe out, you want to crash the world economy, pay off the U.S. national debt. Just pay it off and don't pay interest anymore. Where are they going to get their money? Tax their own people?
They call this is what they call complex interdependence with countries. And it basically started in the late 19th century, and it's gone now. See, what's happening is, though, we're noticing, in states that previously didn't have any problems, like Florida and things like that. There's a lot of Canadians that have homes there, and they were traveling, and they would spend the summer months, the winter months in Florida, and to a certain extent some of the summer months, and they're snowbirds. Well, what's happening is they're not coming now, and then there's a new travel restriction. If they stay more than 30 days, they have to notify the State Department. So a lot of those people are starting to put their places up for sale, and that's going to have an impact on the economies of places like Florida.
And the tourism is coming. So what I think I'm back on Zoom.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
I got you.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Let me raise this up. So what's happening is there's a concern that it's going to have an impact on our economy too.
Okay, yeah, it will have. I never said it wasn't going to have an impact on the economy. All right.
No, I know.
It might hurt some people here or there, but here's the thing. One, the market is going down, right? But that's a correction. For the last 4 years, from 3 months ago, right? For the last since January. 4 years previous to January 21st, the market was not unofficial, that's the wrong word, artificially boosted up by printing money and buying these stocks and distributing money and buying stocks and buying stocks and buying stocks and boosting the market, keeping the market up there. Everyone's like, oh, look at my 401k. It's boosted. As in 2008, well, previous to 2008, when they had lessened the restrictions on banks, they mandated that banks lessen their restrictions on their loaning policy on property, consumer property, places where people live, not big industrial places, but people's homes. And they had lent out a lot of money to people who they knew couldn't pay it back, but they took their money off the top, and then they bundled all these loans and they resold them to investment companies as, mortgage loans, right? Which, when I grew up, there, mortgage loans. You remember Tallman Home, right?
Right.
They own pretty much 90% of the Southwest side,
right?
In mortgages, and that's good money. They're taking in 7% mortgage and they're paying out 3% interest, right? So they don't even have to be invested in the government bonds. But then the banks started investing in government bonds, all right? And they didn't care about the mortgages anymore because they're getting all that interest from government bonds. So they're paying for everything on government bonds. But it was a bubble. It was artificially boosted because all of a sudden you have people selling and selling and selling, and price of properties went up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And then a lot of them went up and they bundled the bad ones. And then everyone thought, wait a second, these are all bad. These are billions and billions of dollars in bad loans that are never going to come back. And they're like, oopsie, we didn't see that. They absolutely knew about it. And then they're like, all the insurance companies that were invested in these, right, they should have known about them, right? But they have to carry so much, capital, right? And they listed these properties as their capital, right? And they go, oh, we got to get bailed out now. I'm like, nope. I was sitting there. I'm like, nope, fail. Then people were like,
it was even worse than that, because that's what I was doing. They had a thing where it wasn't enough just to buy the loans. What they were doing is we in the government industry used to call them liar loans.
Yes.
And I used to do a lot of fraud cases where you'd get a crooked mortgage guy with a crooked appraiser. And what happened is they'd buy a house in the morning from a guy, say an older guy, and the house needed to be repaired. Well, they brought in an appraiser and he'd appraise it as the price you were buying it for. But then he'd do something called as repaired or as improved. And then they sell that to another guy. And then what would happen is the house was no more than what you paid for it at 8 in the morning. But when he resold it at noon, to a fraudulent buyer, it was at the increased value.
And
then so that's what was bundled in those loans that were, you know, and there was identity theft and things like that. So that's, you know, the industry got greedy, and then they put restrictions on it, and then, you know, but that's
they re-put restrictions on it. Right. The restrictions that have been removed, they started putting them on. And here's the thing with this. The thing is, all right, the bubble burst, and a lot of people lost a lot. But there were other people that made a lot, and not too many of them went to prison for doing these fraudulent things because there was just so many of them, right?
Right.
But here's what we got now. We got a bubble in the market. It's not everyone could see it's a bubble in the market. So this stuff is dropping. Why is it dropping? Because it's not going to be supported anymore. And the company, you know, people are selling off companies that are going to have to make huge capital investments again to make money in the United States again. So yes, things are dropping, but you wait 6 months and stuff will start going up. The stuff that doesn't go up in 6 months was bubbled. It was flat out bubbled. Right. So people are losing a little bit of money, or if they're like selling, if everything dropped and they panic sold, that's on them. I don't know how to play the market or whatever, but you're not guaranteed to make money in the market. It's like I'm not guaranteed to when I go throw the dice in Vegas. It's gambling. It's flat out gambling.
Well, you know, there's something I learned a real long time ago, and it was I started working in about 1984. Okay, and you know, my father said, you know, you should buy an IRA, and I said, oh, okay. And then I bought an IRA in something that was called Kemper Government Securities.
Okay, yeah.
And the whole draw on it was your investment was guaranteed because they were government securities, okay? But your profit wasn't guaranteed, okay? So I put $2,000 in it, and by the time the stock market crash of 89 or whatever happened, it was up to $4,000. Okay, now that's pretty good. After 6 years, you doubled your money, you know, and all of a sudden the stock market crashed, and you get a statement in the mail, and it's $2,000. And I said, wait a minute, and I said I had 4,000 in there. They said that's right, and I said, but my investment was guaranteed. They said that's right. And I said, but I lost $2,000, half of my investment. And they said, well, that was the accumulated profit. I go, wait a minute.
You didn't lose your investment. You didn't lose your.
You didn't lose what you put in, but you lost what it accumulated.
Yeah, you could have made more in the bank.
Right. And I said, really? And the guy said, yeah. He goes, that's how we do it. We spread it around everybody in the fund. We take the loss. I go, okay. And then, you know what, I immediately, I cashed out the IRA. I cashed it out. I paid the taxes on, and I really never invested in anything like that again. So, you know, my whole deal is I'm always with the conservative. You know, the stuff that, you know, CDs, government-backed.
What they call blue chip. They call blue chip. It's going to pay out dividends. Even if it doesn't go up in value, it's paying out consistent dividends.
Right, because, you know, I worked for that money, and, you know, I could, like you said, I could throw it away and maybe make more gambling, but I could also lose it all gambling.
And the government isn't going to cover you and bail you out, are they?
Right, no.
I cashed in my entire pension fund, all my IRAs, and I went to Vegas to double my money. I lost everything. Can you please pay that back so I can enjoy the retirement I earned? They're like, no. Right. Now I'm a insurance company. What was the big one out there? And I'm knowing people who known or should have known. That's the key one. They should have known. They're hired as experts. They're hired to look at this stuff. They're hired to know it. They knew it. They just didn't say anything about it because they were hoping to pull out before it bubbled and it went down, right? The bubble popped, right? So they known or should have known, and they lost all this money because they gambled with the time. I lost billions and billions of dollars, but I got all these so-called investors. Can I get bailed out? Sure thing, no problem. How about here's a check? You know,
You're too big to fail.
no,
is what
that's
they
never.
called it.
That's in my opinion. You're never too big to fail. Never. All right. If you're too big to fail, the government should block you up, break you up like AT&T. If you are a big corporation that the United States needs and relies on, and you're too big to fail, then you should be broken up. That just to protect us, because I don't want to have to pay for some stupid CEO's decision.
Exactly.
All right. So what I'm getting at is like, all right, there's going to be pain in the tariffs. There's going to be pain. We're going to have a little pain. But here's the secret with war, right? Whoever could take the most pain wins.
Is the victor.
Is the victor. The Chinese are already feeling it. They're terrified. Oh, we're going to raise our tariffs then. Everyone's going, see, they raised their tariffs. I'm like, but we never had tariffs on them to that effect, right? The reason they're raising their tariffs is they're terrified. Because right now, everything is so subsidized that if people stop buying that steel, there's no more cash coming in. And their whole economy is based on the government paying for everyone. Everyone. There's a few billionaires that they'll steal money from, but most of the Chinese people, you know, the government writes their paycheck. The money's gone, the food's gone. If you don't grow your own food, you're messed up and everything. And talk about unfair trade practices. Like, okay, in the United States, this is maybe getting a little off there, right? But we have bees. Bees are good because they pollinate stuff like fruit trees, right? Like vegetables, like tomatoes, like the almonds. It's the almonds, you know, nut trees in California. It's so dry and there's nothing else but these nut trees, which only flower once a year, that people from all over the country put their beehives on trucks, truck them into California, where the farmers pay them to have these beehives there. The bees fly around for a couple weeks, cross-pollinating everything. Then they take the bees back to where they got fields of clover and wildflowers and pine trees and everything else for the bees to get the pollen from. And so we got bees to do that. In China, they got people climbing up ladders and pollinating with like Q-tips or paintbrushes, shaking the flowers for all these fruit trees because they don't give a damn about their environment. They just let it go bad, and they've killed off the bees. The bees can't live. So they killed them off. Their water's polluted, right? And so why is it more expensive to produce something in the United States? Because we have, and I'm off, we have regulations. There's reasonable regulations and there's unreasonable regulations. But we have the environment. We protect our environment. I'm all about it. I love the outdoors. I love the environment. I walk around and I see a half, dried up worm, but it's still alive on the sidewalk. I pick it up and throw it into the grass in a nice, cool, wet spot, That's how good I mean, you might think that that's a little weird of me, but yeah, I love the environment. The Chinese, they've used, what is it, oligarch?
Yeah.
Oligarch.
Oligarchs.
So oligarchs, the United States is using that as well, not the United States, but the mainstream press and everything, the fearmongers, the screamers, the anti-current establishment people are screaming, oh, he's just making, he's just hooking up with oligarchs. He's only, he's an oligarch. He's a billionaire. And this guy, the Musk is an oligarch. The biggest oligarchs are in China. This guy's billions and billions. He doesn't care. He's in charge of everything. Do you think he cares about some farmer's field that can't have pollinated because the bees are all dead? He don't care. I got 1.5 billion people. Get your kids out there with paintbrushes and pollinate because you got to produce that food, right?
Today's oligarchs were yesterday's warlords.
Yeah, they're true. All right, but the thing is that we have these regulations, and so corporations go, well, it's more expensive because I have to filter the crap out of the water before I put it back into the, or treat the water before I put it back into the river and the lake, right? And down in Mexico, I could just dump it wherever because I bribed, I did the bean counting. I bribed the politician. They don't care. The people around me don't care because they don't want to lose their jobs that I'm providing them with, right? They turn a blind eye to it. And so it's cheaper to do stuff there because I don't have to buy all those filters or hire people to treat this stuff or monitor anything like that. So there's an unfair trade practice right there. But I feel that our regulations, up to a point, are highly necessary. And in order to compete, we should absolutely have a tariff on any country that doesn't have to meet the same regulations we meet. Okay, so we'll be back for the second half of the show. Call in. We're on YouTube Live out there, and I will be uploading this show almost right away since it didn't go out off of the radio. Fixed Bayonets, brother, comrades, we're back. Except for Paul. I think you may have thought that we were over. All right.
Oh. No, I'm here.
Okay. Hey, Paul, I kind of not by choice, but I kind of monopolized the first half of the show, but we only got like 10 minutes left. So I'm going to let you fill in the last 10 minutes.
What? All right. Well, this is kind of interesting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got a caller. You want to have him in?
Okay. Yeah, let's have him come in.
Hey, welcome to the show. Oh, they dropped.
Okay, carry on, Paul.
All right, here's what's interesting. Now, we all know from about 2 months ago, we were talking about the Constitution and how it affects everything.
Yes.
So, Congress is the one that regulates tariffs. Okay.
That is true.
All right, but a couple interesting things happen. And I kind of like this because it's part of actually our history, okay? So what happened is Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States, okay? So what happened is there was a case in that they kind of delegated the power to the president. Was in 1825. And in Wayman versus Southard, 1825, Chief Justice John Marshall noted that Congress could not delegate powers that are strictly and exclusively legislative. Okay. So then came a tariff that came into effect around 1890, okay? And our own Marcia Field sued in federal court, and it was Marcia Field and Company objected to tariffs in 1892, mind you, placed on sugar, molasses, coffee, tea, and hides under the Tariff Act of 1890. And that act directed the president to place such levies when other nations use tariffs the president may deem to be, now this is important because we're hearing this word in quotes all the time now, reciprocally unequal and unreasonable.
That's right.
That's why the words reciprocal tariffs are in fashion now. And Marcia Field claimed that Congress had improperly granted legislative power to the president. But in that case, Justice John Marshall Harlan said the president was acting in his executive role, executing a congressional policy. Now, we talked about this too. The right after the 16th Amendment was enacted in 1913, okay?
Yeah.
Federal income tax came into being.
Yes.
Now, prior to that, we talked about this, there was a tax on phone calls, long-distance phone calls in the 1890s. And that's what paid for the Spanish-American War. And that just finished like about 20 years ago. So they were using all that money to pay. But once the 16th Amendment came in, they shifted their money from tariffs to income tax on the American. And then in 1934, there was the Reciprocal Trade Act, which gave President Franklin Roosevelt the ability to change tariffs rates by 50% and negotiate bilateral trade tariffs.
And he was a Democrat president, right?
He was.
And Democrat Congress gave him that.
Right. A lot of this came into effect after that. Now, there's presently 4 laws, really, that, six laws. One of them is the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which was used by President Trump in his first administration to tax the aluminum imports and steel. And then there's the Trade Act of 1974, which imposed tariffs if the U.S. International Trade Commission finds an import surge that threatens domestic industry.
Yes.
And then there's 4 factors in here. There's the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which allows the president to do it as a national economic, which he's doing.
So Jimmy Carter was president during that time, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
And we're talking almost 50 years ago now.
All right. Yeah.
And that is what Donald Trump is using to institute these present tariffs.
Nice.
Okay. Now, the only thing that is concerning is, and I had a professor that tried to make me do a report on this, and when I was in college, and I didn't do it, but it's kind of famous because of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The one thing we have to watch out for is the Smoot-Hawley type of tariff. And that happened in 1930, and it's considered by some to be the precursor of the beginning of the World War II, because it imposed rapid changes even on our allies, and people became frustrated around the world, and it's credited with causing the increase of the worldwide depression. So tariffs are an important thing, but they have to be used methodically and with great concern.
I agree. And here's one of the things to top this off is I believe that our current administration is not willy-nilly doing anything. I believe for the last 4 years, there were people in place studying stuff, all right? And there were lawyers, constitutional lawyers, that were saying everything that we're going to do is going to be constitutionally sound because we don't want to get overturned by the Supreme Court. It's kind of like when you're a president and you veto something, all right, early in your career, and then Congress comes and overrides your veto. You now become a lame duck. You like Congress is going to override everything you veto, all right? And so if you're doing things that an unfriendly Supreme Court is going to immediately overturn, that they're going to rush the cases and everything, you don't want to do that. So I think everything, I have to say, this is my opinion, I believe everything that they're doing, right, is constitutionally sound, right? And they're going to do it reckless abandon because they'll be in the rights. The main thing is national defense. I think the tariffs are being used, like you said, the steel and aluminum. Those were big ones back in his previous administration. Again, you want to have aluminum and steel manufacturing in the United States for defense purposes, to defend our country, not just for the high-paying jobs that they're worth, but to defend our country, to be able to produce stuff, all right? Lightweight aluminum for lighter weight stuff, heavier steel and everything. You want to be able to produce that, All right? And if you have to buy it from overseas, that store can close their doors to you anytime they want, without us invading them and just taking it over. So
this should have never been allowed to happen in the first place.
absolutely.
And it should never happen again. Even if we have only a minimum capability that could be ramped up or expanded, we should never ever let this happen again, where we're reliant on things to come in from overseas or from other countries.
And you know,
and maybe we should get into I would say locally we should maybe be in more bilateral things with maybe Canada and Mexico, but the problem is those governments are unfriendly to us, even though they're our neighbors and allies, and we should maybe strive to encourage them to become more friendly, and I would agree with that. But this brings another point. I've said this because I've commented on a couple of YouTube channels from Canadian people. They have to work 50 years to get a down payment on a house. and they now issue 99-year mortgages.
whoa,
There's nobody around that's 150. Plus, if you're 50,
not according to Social Security last year.
I know that's why I think Canada had something to do with that. But anyway, but if you're 50 when you first buy your house, and you're 100, nobody's around at 100.
Well, your grandchildren, the idea is that your grandchildren move into your house. The idea that is you don't have multiple you can't split the estate 4 or 5 ways. It's got to be one son or one daughter, or maybe one son and one daughter because they could get married to another one. And then you don't split the estate. It's just a direct generational wealth that doesn't get reduced. And a generational debt. So these banks and everything still have you paying forever.
Right.
Yeah. So you don't want to raise your population.
Right.
And but okay. So getting back, the Canada thing was nice, right? Oh no, I'm better off to do in Canada because I could buy a cheaper house, right, down in Florida, and I could live there a couple months out of the year. Oh, no, I can't do it now because Trump's got mean tariffs. Well, you know what? Too bad. Change your government. Vote the other way. Right? It's on them. I don't care about the Canadian. I'm not crying one tear about them. Let them change their government. People deserve the government they have, and we deserve the government we have right now.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, next week, we'll be back again. More ranting, more aluminum hat wearing from me. But Paul, thank you for your expert legal expertise and experience.
Thanks. Have a good week.
All right.